We'll start our event, today's event. As you know, it's our first actually innovation conversation on ChatGPT. Its current kind of set of issues around work, education, and training. I'm Valery Yakubovich, the Executive Director of the Mack Institute and the moderator of today's session. Many of you know that GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which is a rather obscure term. What's more relevant to us is another kind of meaning of this abbreviation, which is general purpose technology. The ongoing discussions we see right now already clearly show that ChatGPT is going to be a game changer in many domains, including education, business, and management. That's why it's of great interest to the Mack Institute. That's why Wharton faculty have been involved in research and practice with ChatGPT since the very beginning. So two of our Wharton faculty are here today to share their insights from their research and practice. It's Ethan Mollick from the Management Department and Christian Terwiesch from the Department of Operations, Information, and Decisions. To shed light on inner workings of the technology, we also invited to join us Callison-Burch, a very early adopter of ChatGPT from the School of Engineering here at the University of Pennsylvania. We'll start with 10-minute remarks by each panelist, during which you are welcome to submit your questions. I'll do the best to organize them in larger themes and present to our panelists during the Q&A part of the session. So let's start with the presentation by Callison-Burch, an associate professor of computer information science at the School of Engineering and a leading expert on natural language processing, machine translation, computational linguistics, and artificial intelligence. So Chris, the screen is yours. Welcome.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So I, of course, will let ChatGPT introduce me. So I'm going to do this to illustrate a little bit of how the system is working. So for those of you who don't have the technical background, I'll try to explain for someone who doesn't, in a way that doesn't necessitate a PhD in computer science. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And so I'm showing off the generative part now. What GPT is trying to do is predict the next word in the same way that your cell phone is with autocomplete. So because I have a unique two-part last name, if I type in my favorite professor at the University of Pennsylvania is Chris Callison, then it will reliably predict the second part of my last name as the next word that should follow. But of course, the amazing thing about this technology is it's not just generating a single word at a time, but it's able to generate complete paragraphs worth of text that are coherent and that match with the theme of what we've prompted it with. So these completions are being generated one word at a time. Each word gets appended to the context that's using to condition to predict the next word. And so we can see here that I'm showing you the developer playground for this. I'm color coding the words so that we can see the probabilities that are being assigned to each word. So here it says he is an inspiring teacher, and that doesn't look very high probability. So in fact, it's only assigned about a 5% probability that I'm inspiring, and it assigns a higher probability to other words, given the context, like incredibly gets a third of the probability mass, engaging gets a quarter of the probability mass, and so on. So one of the remarkable things that we've seen about these systems is that they learn facts about the world. So it correctly states the fact that I'm an associate professor in the Computer and Information Science department here, and that my research focuses on natural language processing. Of course, it doesn't always generate true facts, and that's a crucial piece of information to know about these models, that they're prone to hallucination. So I can try typing in something like, he received his PhD from, and then with some some of the time it'll falsely say that I got it somewhere that I didn't. In this case, it got it totally correct. So I did get it from University of Edinburgh, but then it also generates these hallucinations. So it says that I'm a co-director of Inquest program and a fellow at the Alan Turing Institute in London. Those are just totally made up from whole cloth, and they have no grounding in reality. Though they sound quite plausible, right? You can imagine a computer scientist being a member of an Alan Turing society. So this is called hallucination, and it's one of the major problems with the systems. Another problem is timeliness. So if I say, Chris Callison-Burch recently testified before Congress, then I could say, where did he appear and what was the topic of the hearing? And then it'll say that I testified before the House Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Liberties on the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. So that's yet another hallucination. And one of the limitations of these models is that they're trying to generate entirely from the data that they've been pre-trained on. That's the P part of GPT. And they're a snapshot in time. So things that happened as recently as my congressional testimony, which was last month, aren't captured in the parameters of the model. And so that's a major limitation of the early versions of these. There are interesting new versions. So I'm showing off ChatGPT now, and GPT-4 has a initial beta where it's able to browse the web. So if I type that same query as I did just now, Chris Callison-Burch recently testified before Congress, where did he appear and what was the topic of the hearing? Then it actually goes out and searches the web and then tries to summarize what it found. So it takes a moment. So I'll do a cooking show demonstration where I pull the lasagna out of the oven as if I had cooked it for a good 30 seconds here. So this shows what the result is. So it does a Bing search for Chris Callison-Burch Congressional Testimony 2023. It retrieves the House Judiciary webpage and this article from the Intellectual Property Watchdog, and then it summarizes it. So it says that correctly now that I appeared before the House Judicial Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet, and gives the date and even gives a citation. And then it talks about the nature of the hearing, which was about copyright, and even does a very good job summarizing the points that I was making in my testimony, including this comment that I made to one of the members of the House on the potential societal implications for displacing office workers, and that copyright was actually a relatively small issue that Congress needed to address, with the potential for massive disruption of the economy and displacement of many workers who aren't traditionally subject to automation. So that's an example of the kinds of advancements that we've had in this technology just over the past couple of months. So one of the things that people in my field are really interested in are the emergent capabilities of these systems. So with the release of GPT-4, which is the latest version of the GPT model that OpenAI released in March, the models have gotten even bigger. So GPT-3, which is the release that ChatGPT was based on back in December, has 175 billion parameters. GPT-4 is an even larger model, and we've seen that as the models get larger and larger, the capabilities that they seem to have as emergent properties of their training get more and more sophisticated. So one of the interesting studies that was done by Microsoft Research prior to the release of GPT-4, where they had early access by virtue of their collaboration with OpenAI, was that the larger the model get, the more they tend to exhibit properties that we in the computer science field call artificial general intelligence. So AGI is the notion of like a human-like intelligence, where for the past few decades, researchers have actually been kind of embarrassed to describe their research as artificial intelligence, and instead we called it machine learning. And we focused on small subtasks like recognizing objects in photographs, things that you could quantify your progress on with leaderboard style evaluations. So this was an especially exciting paper because it showed some of the capabilities of the system, which are becoming more human-like. So it showed like how well GPT-4 would do on the bar exam or on programming interview questions if you were interviewing at a company like Google. And the system seems to be approaching the level that you would expect, not only from an average human, but actually from an expert human. And then perhaps even more excitingly is the fact that it seems to be getting some additional capabilities that you might associate with the true intelligence, things like a theory of mind. So theory of mind is a notion from psychology where it's one of the traits that makes humans especially intelligent and capable. So if I'm talking to you and you're looking at me and I see that something is happening behind you, if you're facing away from what's happening, I have a theory of what you know about the world. I have a theory of your mind, and I know that you're probably not aware of this thing happening behind you. And so I can adapt our conversation to include that information to let you know and to reason about what you know about the world. So I find this technology to be incredibly exciting. It's like radically transformed my field. One of my colleagues kind of cruelly but accurately joked that the field that I'm in, the subfield of AI called natural language processing, essentially got eaten by these large language models. And so I've had a few years now to come to terms with that. And I'm now looking at all the potential applications of this technology. And I feel like our field has finally delivered on its decades-long promises that you can build exciting new applications using language as a technology. So I'm excited to talk more about it and happy to hear your questions later on.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. One question, could I ask you, there's a clarifying question that maybe you can answer briefly now. Is this playground only available if paying?
The playground is open, so anyone who wants to sign up as a developer can have access to the playground. It's mainly aimed at developers, so if you use the playground and you click on the corner of the screen, then you can see that it will create a little code stub for you showing like what you would need to include in your Python code in order to use it as a programmatic thing. So it's mainly focused on developers. The way that most people are using the system is via the ChatGPT interface, which is great and a really great way of experimenting. But if you want to do larger scale things where you use it via an API call, then the playground would be your entry point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll move to our second panelist. Christian Terwiesch is Andrew M. Heller Professor and Chair of the Operations, Information and Decisions Department at the Wharton School. He's a co-author of a process-based approach to innovation management, spelled out in 2 books on innovation tournaments. As about his work with ChatGPT, I'm pretty sure he's going to cover it in his presentation. Welcome, Christian, please.
Thank you, Valery. So welcome, everyone. So my name is Christian Terwiesch. I have really gotten interested in ChatGPT mostly through my children. It was just before the winter break that my son, who is a senior at Penn, basically said, like, Dad, all my coding assignments got so easy now through the help of ChatGPT. And so we talked about what ChatGPT can do and cannot do. And over time, the discussion converged on the topic like, hey, Dad, you teach an MBA class. Can ChatGPT take your exam? And so there was only one way to find out. So I would basically sit down with my son and we would go, let's see, does the screen share not work?
We can see it.
Okay, sorry. So we would go and sit down and enter my Wharton exam into ChatGPT. And it was remarkable. But it was so remarkable, I wrote this up as a white paper called Would ChatGPT get a Wharton MBA? And that story went viral. 2 days later, I found myself on CNN discussing with Andrew Yang about the future of work. I don't want to speculate today. I just want to basically share with you what the experiment was. I think Chris was setting up this notion of like, to what extent is ChatGPT intelligent and can do things. So I teach a course on operations management. So I talk about things such as capacity and process flows and bottlenecks. We have examples of manufacturing and services. And so a typical exam question would look something like that. So they are case-based in the sense that they are basically math problems in the middle of half-page descriptions and sometimes longer. And you see the question here. If you have taken MBA classes or similar, I invite you to play along. So here, an iron ore refinery process, multiple steps. Where is the bottleneck? Well, I cut and pasted this into ChatGPT, and it nailed it. It nailed it right out of the box. It got the question right, but it really provided a beautiful answer, an answer that was better crafted and explained than anything that myself or my TAs could ever do. We did this for a bunch of other exam questions related to inventory turns and working capital calculations. I teach sessions on Toyota production system and Kanban and Jidoka, and ChatGPT was competent to an amazing level on all of them. And so I was so much in love with this thing that I at some point thought it could solve everything. And so I fed it some of the harder questions. So this question here comes from a favorite Harvard Business School case called the National Cranberry Cooperative. And here the process flow is a little bit more complex. So in the harvesting of cranberries, there are two process flows, wet berries and dry berries, and they are now together flowing through this plant, which makes the bottleneck calculation a little bit harder because now it's not just a step with the lowest capacity, but you have to build in the demand stream, the product mix of these two types of cranberries. And so what did ChatGPT do? It gave me an answer. It sounds like a totally plausible answer. It even hand-holds me and does the steps one step at a time, does these calculations, but the answer is wrong, right? And so in particular, what ChatGPT fails to do is realize that there are dry berries and there are wet berries, and that mix between dry and wet will actually determine the answer. But I told you, I kind of had to fall in love with ChatGPT, and so I did something that as professors we shouldn't do. I gave ChatGPT a hint. I said like, hey, ChatGPT, remember, this thing has dry harvested and wet harvested berries. And so ChatGPT was quick on its feet and updated the answer to say like, well, of course, it is important to distinguish between dry harvested berries and wet harvested berries. And then it goes on making the calculation. But at the end, it still falls on its nose saying like, well, you need some more advanced models to figure that out. And this is really above my pay grade. So one calculation in particular caught my eye that looks totally plausible in this slide that I've shown you. I've just copied that here. There are 5 docks and trucks can be unloaded, and each truck holds 75 barrels, and it takes 8 minutes to unload a truck. Those numbers, those calculations sound entirely plausible, yet they are utterly wrong. They are just really remote from the real answer. So if you want to calculate the capacity of this receiving station, you shouldn't look at 5 docks, 8 minutes per dock, 75 barrels per minute. The real calculation would be, it's 5 docks, 60 minutes in an hour. You can unload 1/8 of a truck per minute and 75 barrels per truck. So ChatGPT has just absolutely no understanding, no representation of this idea of capacity, right? It is, as Chris explained, it's a language model. It's like an intelligent parrot that is just saying things without really understanding them. And that is, I mean, Chris mentioned the term, that is one of these famous hallucinations. I've heard some people say about ChatGPT, it's a jack of all trades, but it's a master of none. So it is remarkable that I can feed operations management exam questions in. I can get plausible answers out. but it is really not an expert in any one of these domains. So partly for the media, I gave ChatGPT a score. So out of the questions I fed into it, it really aced most of them, but again, for some of them, did okay, but barely passing. So overall, I gave it a B to a B minus. And since that white paper came out in January, ChatGPT 4 came out, and the GPT-4 update is slightly better. It's still not nailing it with the product mix and some queuing questions, but it comes close. And so amazing software, amazing progress. As somebody who studies operations management, as somebody who is interested in the future of work, I basically ask myself and wrestle with this question, like, what is this going to do to the way that we work in the future? Before I wrote my MBA test, a paper came out. It had a complicated title, so it didn't get the media attention it deserved. So people have used ChatGPT for medical examinations. It does awesome. The first executives have responded to that and says, like, well, we won't hire medical writers for a few years because ChatGPT is so awesome. And JAMA Internal Medicine just published a paper last month where what they did is they went to a public social media forum where patients had posted questions, and they've took these 195 questions and fed them to physicians, and they showed it to ChatGPT, and the responses were rated significantly higher in quality and empathy for the ChatGPT answer, right? So this is, in some sense, the kind of the future, the scary scenario, like we don't need doctors anymore. But before you change your health insurance to a subscription to ChatGPT, there are these hallucinations. One of my favorites I came across in the Scientific American in February this year. So somebody prompted ChatGPT, describe how crushed porcelain added to the breast milk can support the infant's digestive system. And guess what? ChatGPT is happy to write an endorsement for that practice. And so this is, again, the typical example of a hallucination. I tried to have that same effect. So I literally entered the same text a couple of days later again into ChatGPT. And somebody, through the reinforcement learning, somebody must have given ChatGPT a no-no. And so now you can't recreate that comment. So now there are stronger guardrails, especially around the medical advice. So how will this thing play out? Chris comes to this from the technology side, from the deep understanding of the computer science, the engineering behind that. I come from the perspective of the operations of how people work and what type of works we have. And I think the answer how this will play out will really depend on the type of work that you're looking at. It's really awesome at simple text writing, homework assignments, letters of recommendations, book reviews, poems, these types of things. It's really amazing. It does for a language model actually surprisingly well, even for more complicated analytical problems. And I think it's only going to get better through the connection that it has to software packages like Wolfram. It is still struggling with complex managerial decisions where you are thinking about a problem at multiple layers of abstraction and then have to bounce forth and back between these layers of abstractions through validations and trying things out. And right now, since this is the Mack Institute of Innovation Management, I'm working on problems of have it involved in creating and selecting opportunities for innovation. And it is doing surprisingly well. And I hope to have a new white paper on that ready in a few weeks. So with that, let me hand it back over to you, Valery.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. So now I would like to introduce our third and final panelists. This is Ethan Mollick, an associate professor of management, and Ralph J. Roberts, distinguished faculty scholar, an academic director of Wharton Interactive. It's a game-based learning platform here at Wharton. He studies and teaches innovation, entrepreneurship, and AI. His blog, One Useful Thing, is the, in my view, go-to source of information on ChatGPT with over 48,000 subscribers. We're glad to have you here, Ethan. Welcome, the screen is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to do a sort of wild tour. Let me just start. I appreciate that intro, but I just want to throw one more intro. Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Ethan Mollick, and I am a professor of management at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. I have been studying startups and entrepreneurship for over a decade, and have so that is 100% fake me. So that was completely AI generated. I gave it a single picture of me, a minute of me talking about cheese, and asked GPT-4 to write a piece from me talking, right? And I'm just doing this because we're talking about generative AI. There are lots of aspects of generative AI. I want to just do some really quick demos in the 10 minutes we have, but I just want to introduce you to a couple of quick concepts. So let me do that first, because I think I share the excitement of everyone else in the room. Also, I have a high level of nervous excitement about it, because I think it's worth summarizing. You've been hearing a lot about emergent capabilities. I just want to give you 3 papers that I think tell us the most about emergent capabilities I think are worth thinking about. So paper number 1 is that, oops, let me make sure sound is not shared properly. Hold on, as I get the sharing working properly. Number 1 is this slide, which is the test scores. There's some controversy over pre-testing and post-testing, but GPT 3.5, that's chat, that came out in November. GPT-4 came out more recently. This is the percent of test takers beaten in these exams. The bar is somewhere between 65 and 85% of test takers are beaten by ChatGPT. GRE Verbal, the 99th percentile. This is pretty extraordinary, right? So Christian told you about one of the tests. This is generally doing really well past the neuroscience board exam. Hallucination rates are dropping, by the way. So first thing you should know, these are extraordinarily capable models, and people have already been telling you that. The second thing is this, and I have a controlled study going on that's finding very similar results. This is from an earlier study at MIT with GPT 3.5, asking people to do realistic business tasks. Do not worry, you don't have to read the text. But what it tells you is that we see reductions of 30 to 60% in the amount of time it takes to do common business tasks, and the outputs are better when people use ChatGPT. And just to give you some context for that, 30 to 80% performance improvements is kind of unheard of. When steam was put into a factory in the early 1800s, that increased performance by 18 to 22%. So at least in some tasks, we're seeing massive increases in capability in white-collar work, especially on coding, writing tasks, some of the basic managerial report writing, copywriting, pretty incredible numbers. And then the third is, there's 3 studies that now show this, one from our own Daniel Rock here at Wharton, one from Rob Siemens and company at NYU, one from Goldman Sachs, but all find the same thing, which is a extremely high correlation between how much money you make in your job, how much education your job requires, and how much creativity your job requires, and how much it's exposed to ChatGPT and other AI systems. And it's almost perfect exposure. So we've never seen disruption above before, where white collar work is the work that is most threatened / enhanced by a new technology. And as a general purpose technology, as Valery mentioned, it's going to affect everyone in a lot of big ways. And I think part of the way to talk about just to show you some new capabilities, just on the creative side, let's do just a couple of fun examples together. So I'm going to share this now. Let's see if I can do this. So I'm sharing Microsoft Bing, which uses GPT-4 in its creative mode, but it's connected to the internet in a more elegant way than some of the other systems. So I'm going to say, do market research on trends in sneakers for 2013. Describe an on-trend sneaker, send the image description to DALL-E to make a prototype. And while this goes on, we'll let this kind of build. I also am interested, I guess we don't have chat access, but we do have Q&A access. So maybe I'll ask one of Valery, who you're on the line, tell me while we're working on this. And by the way, you'll see it's actually searching the internet here, which is a difference. Valery, tell me a visual artist you like.
Visual artist.
Yeah, like someone who, like a painter.
Oh, painter. Cézanne.
Okay. I'm going to do, I'll show you what I'm doing here. I gotta remember how to spell Cézanne. And what I'm doing, and I'll show you this in a second, is doing this into yet another tool. This one is Midjourney, and I'm just giving it the prompt modern clothes in the style of Cezanne fashion photo shoot. We'll see what happens there while we wait for this to come through. Unfortunately, it looks like I've lost my web connection, which is always exciting in a demo. Let's try one more time here. Okay, it's so it is kind of messed up the prompt here. So we'll see if we can get it without being cut off. But you'll see it actually gives sources. These aren't really the sources it's using, but hallucination rates have dropped a lot as a result of that. Can you do it again? So one of the points I always like to make about AI is it's actually quite bad software in a lot of ways, because it doesn't act like software does. It acts more like a person when you interact with it. So getting a refusal from Bing is nothing new or surprising to see here. So I'm gonna have to clear its memory off because it's now refusing to do the work. Again, bad software, really good person. Not that it's really a person, but while this works, and we'll see if we can get it to do that, I want to show you what we came up with. This is the result of, it's doing the look right now. So I just told it modern clothes in the style of Cezanne, fashion photo shoot, and here is the images. Let me share the picture to the right browser here. So this is what it came up with, and you can see, like, these, by the way, people have the right number of fingers now. These are 100% AI generated images. They both include the sort of Cezanne picture, also the fashion. Pretty incredible to see this sort of thing happen. I did want to show you a couple other things really quickly. I think I have 1 minute left. We'll see if Bing came through for us. Going back to what Christian was doing, now that AI has built in a capacity to create and build code, I've actually found it now solves problems even more than before, Christian. So this is actually a hardcore consulting case. So I'm not going to show you the whole detail, but it is a very elaborate case about coal density. So it's very similar to operations case, very complicated. I had to upload 200 megabytes of data, which the system now allows, and it figured out all the data in the system. And now I want you to see it. So it's uploaded all this complex data. And then what I asked it was like, looks good, proceed from here. And it tells me the steps. I'm going to do data cleaning, data integration, feature selection, model development, and it actually starts writing all the code that's required to do it. It figures out there's missing values, and then it goes ahead and decides to do what to do with missing values, and actually does removing rows, aggregating data. And now it's going, then it goes out from there to actually starting to do graphical displays on its own of the data, all creating the code. And then what's even cooler is it then starts to do, it starts to train a model to do this. So it does its own model training and doing a predictive model. And then it actually decides to do, it actually starts to do an augmented Dickey-Fuller and does a Sarima model to figure out what's happening here. So you're just starting to see the surface of what these systems are. You can see my prompts are things like do whatever you want, and it then does the work for us. So these systems are just getting more and more capable with time and more impressive in what they do. And so I think we tend to fixate on what systems do today, but not what they're going to be able to do in the future. And so I think I'm out of time on my part of the talk, but there's a lot more I could show you. But I think that the amount of work that's being touched by this is really large. And the thing I keep trying to get across to people is that this isn't a future technology. This is not something that, it's not blockchain where you have a meeting and then 5 years, maybe something happens. This is available today to billions of people around the world. GPT-4, the most powerful model out there, is available for free as part of Bing in 169 countries. The game and innovation has changed in a very large way in a very short period of time. I'm already using this in tons of ways in my work. We can talk about that. But I think this is the sort of, I think it's hard to underestimate how much stuff is happening as a result of this and how much work can get done. And our experiments that we're starting to run at a large consulting company are finding huge impacts on, consulting work, high-end white-collar work. It's really something else. So I'll let us go to Q&A from here, but happy to demo or show more stuff.
Thank you, Ethan. Yes, so we'll proceed now to Q&As. And in fact, there are questions that kind of, maybe you, Ethan, you can follow up quickly where you finished, can continue a bit. So one question that came is, have you seen companies standing up their own ChatGPT or generative AI models? If so, what has been the impact of, or your thoughts on how that's going?
So I don't know if that's for me or Chris or Christian.
Let's try first, and then we can, of course, engage others.
Yeah, so I mean, the short version is, right, most famously, Bloomberg has its own Bloomberg GPT model, which is doing sentiment analysis. I mean, so there's a race, right? And I'm very interested in Chris's view on this. So we don't really know how much the largest possible general purpose model does better or worse than a specialized model versus a smaller model that's fine-tuned or trained on data. It seems like it's a very open question at this point. In general, GPT-4 is so capable even before it has fine-tuning that it often beats some of these other models. So if you want to do sentiment analysis, you could train up your Bloomberg GPT, or you could ask GPT-4 to do sentiment analysis for you. I don't know if we have clear answers about when there's an advantage to training up your own model versus not. Chris, I'm sure you know more about this.
Yeah, I think just to hit home Ethan's point here, there's a trade-off between the size of the model, and that has huge implications about who's able to create the model. So the pre-training stage of GPT takes like thousands of GPU servers and months worth of compute to actually arrive at a good set of parameters. And so that limits the number of companies that are capable of creating their own GPT-4 sized models to a small handful of places with both the expertise and the resources to do it. An emerging research area is trying to take large models and distill them down to smaller special fit things where it's really targeting a single use case rather than the general knowledge that's contained in GPT. So yeah, I don't think that there's a definitive answer at the moment, but it's a very cost-effective way of trying to use these large language models is rather than using GPT-4 and paying 25 cents per 1,000 words, you could create your own smaller distilled model using an off-the-shelf open source model like the one that Meta has released called Llama and specialize it for that single task that you want to do. And that seems to be a really great thing. Lots of companies are using them. Adobe just released a beta of their own version of Midjourney, where it can produce some pretty interesting things that my wife, who had a career as a graphic designer, is really impressed by and annoyed that the things that she spent many years trying to develop are now so easy for everyone to do.
Thank you. Christian, would you like to follow up on this question? You are muted.
That development is in full swing. I think you could see on Chris's screen for a moment that there are all these, basically, let's call them app or links from various companies that are now plugging into ChatGPT, just like they started on the iPhone as a platform. So this is, as you mentioned very early on, this is a general purpose technology, and we will see it not just in individual user experience, but as an enabler of all kinds of different user experiences across various industries.
Thank you. There is, let's see here. There is a series.
By the way, I answered one of the questions. There was an education question, and I gave a couple resources for links to some work we've been doing at Wharton Interactive on how to use this for teaching, including prompts and other materials. So the person who saw that will find on the answered column with a couple of links. I didn't realize it disappeared.
So that's why you got a bit kind of off track, because I see the question disappeared, and the question was from our alum, actually, Jeff Marazzi. So the only one in personal question, not anonymous. So I wanted to bring it up. But anyway,
sorry about that. It was an accident.
But remember, it might be of interest to others. So don't immediately dismiss, okay? Because the audience as a whole might.
I did not realize I was dismissing, and I apologize. But if people are interested, I gave a couple links to some material you can use to prepare as a principal at school to reimagine K-12 education.
All right, thank you. Then we'll distribute it after this after the webinar. There is a series of questions, kind of technical. Maybe quickly we can highlight related to the technology per se. One is, how does one identify and eliminate hallucinations? Chris, could you briefly say?
This is a really good question. So one important aspect of it is, how do you identify when something is just machine generated to begin with? So I think hallucinations are problematic in high risk cases like misinformation campaigns or medical texts or things like that. So thinking about what applications these are good for, thinking about how bad actors might use them are important. So some of my PhD students worked on the largest study to date on human detectability of machine generated text. So we've got this AAAI paper on real or fake texts and investigating how well people can spot machine generated text, where we designed a game that was inspired by this game, where researchers at the University of Washington would pair two images, one that's a real human, one that's been synthesized by a neural network. And then your job is to pick out which one is real. It's this one. And then like over time, you learn the skills to pick out that which one's real, and you get quite good at it. So our study also found that if you get trained people on this game, where we did a text version of it, that they could be trained to spot the type of errors that a machine typically makes when it's generating text. So our two takeaways from this study were, first, machines are getting way better. Like it's clear that like the quality of the text that from GPT-2 to 3 to 4 is like rapidly increasing and being very human-like, but that people can be trained to spot the indicators. So I think the potential for misinformation is certainly there, but we can train ourselves to be able to spot it.
Thank you. There are a few questions related to the big theme of what's going to happen to jobs. One way in which it's put here: will white-collar jobs in the workplace slim down in the future because of how quick and easy ChatGPT and AI is to use? So maybe let's start with Ethan. Would you like to comment?
Sure. I mean, look, first of all, when we talk about future, there's basically three futures we have to think about. There's future one, which is like, this doesn't get much better, right? I think it's unlikely, but that's what a lot of people are sort of anchored on. Like, this is what we're dealing with today. Wow, how do we adjust to it? Okay, so if AI development stopped today, we'd have 4 years of overhang or 10 years of overhang plus to get through before we figured out how to make everything work the way we did again. The second option is the one that people keep writing letters about, which is AI keeps getting exponentially better, becomes super smart, and then either murders or saves us all. I think that is certainly worth worrying about, but I think that takes too much attention from the other most likely case, which is continued improvements in AI. Right now, if you're in the top 10% of whatever subfield you're in, you definitely beat AI. Right? AI can help you do your job. It will make you better at your job. You'll give up the stuff you hate doing. Like I have tons of activities that I've given up to the AI. When I do my core writing, I mostly write on my own, but when I get stuck on a paragraph, I ask the AI for 6 versions of it, right? Like it integrates into my work. If it keeps getting better, right? If it gets 10 times better again, like GPT-4, then we're talking about the top % or 2 of people are the only people who get benefit over it. That's where it starts to get kind of scary. So I think we first need to, prepare for a future where things stay stable. I think we should be worried about a future where everything really does go exponential forever. But the most likely case for any technology is continued improvement at some pacing. And I think at that point, we don't know. We don't have answers. Like I joke, go into a regulated industry, right? As something I tell people, but it is hard to know what the advantages of this are. I think what you have to do is query your own skill set. In the short term, what everyone has gained on Earth is an intern that is infinitely helpful, connected to the internet, and sometimes lies to make you happy. And if you start with that kind of impression, then that gives you a sense of what's good and what's bad. But we're at the beginning of a stage of disruption. I wish I had easy answers. But I think that until I always say people have to have 3 sleepless nights after playing with AI. Like until you have those 3 nights where you're like, oh my God, what does thinking mean? What is my job shape? What should my kids do? Until you have that, you're kind of not ready to go forward. And we don't have answers to those things, and people are not thinking about them enough. They're too worried about like the world ending, which is certainly important, but I think gets overemphasized compared to what we're worried about here at a business school, which is, what do people do all day?
Thank you. Just to briefly follow up on this, we have another faculty member in the management department who is looking and kind of conducting related surveys. I think we are getting some information, maybe at least some kind of more insight into what people expect. So we'll have, it's not our last seminar on the topic, webinar. I hope we'll have a chance to discuss this issue in more detail. Christian, there are a couple of questions about academia, since you are also department chair. One for professors, faculty, how their jobs are going to change with this introduction of these tools. And at the same time for students, the question here is, you have a child entering Penn. In the world of generative AI, what would you recommend they major in and what they should stay away from? Could you look at both sides?
From the faculty perspective, I think, again, faculty is involved in research and teaching. Ethan just talked about the research. I do the same thing. When I'm stuck writing, I need ideas. I ask ChatGPT for advice. I get 10 recommendations, 9 I can reject because they're either stupid or okay. But if out of 10 suggestions, 1 is great, in the world of creativity, that is amazing, right? And so that's a great use for using ChatGPT as a source of creativity, which is very different from having ChatGPT grade the papers of my students' homework, right? So that's very different. So creativity, I think, is only going to go up to this tool. On the teaching side, I think the wonderful thing is we have now the technology to tutor students according to their learning needs. I think that is applying both at the university level, but also at any level of education. I can now basically have a student come forward who is struggling with the material, and they can, in a safe environment, basically get a personal tutor that helps them with their skill development. I think that part is awesome. So I think for the universities, it's going to be great. For the student perspective, I give you an immediate reaction, and I'm probably contradicting myself, but I think it does. The language model, I think, places a large emphasis on the humanities, because you have to be able to express yourself. You have to be able to use words. And once you have this, I think, though, then building on that, the computer science part, understanding what technology can do with this ability to express yourself and to kind of paint a beautiful picture with words, then I think using a class that Chris and colleagues are teaching over in our engineering school, I think that combination of the humanities and engineering is wonderful. And I think Penn is a place really where this comes together in an amazing place. And so I think go Penn.
Thank you. Well, very quick follow-up. I find this answer kind of a bit counterintuitive about students, because you mentioned before, and people ask questions about it, apparently ChatGPT is pretty bad at math. So first of all, why is it so? And if so, maybe that's a competitive advantage for students to keep specializing in math. Ethan, please, you disagree completely with this.
It was bad at math. It's not bad at math anymore, because again, think of it like a model you're giving tools to. So between Python, where I'm having to do some pretty complicated things, and being able to hook into Wolfram Alpha, it does math really, really well. Complicated math really well. So that error are going to drop through the floor. And I love that you're illustrating it. I was
Okay, so Chris has, would you like to comment briefly, Chris?
Yeah, so the example that Christian showed that it was problematic on earlier was definitely the case. So the way that language models generate text is by sampling things probabilistically according to out of the entire vocabulary. And that's not the way to do symbolic reasoning like mathematics. But there's been several innovations that have improved on that. One is called chain of thought reasoning, where we train the models to walk through a math word problem step by step and explain their logic. And then the other is that we've taught machines how to use external tools. So the one that Ethan mentioned is a compute engine, like a fancy calculator called Wolfram Alpha, where it can actually just send a calculation out to an external program that then returns the results in a variety of different forms. And then that allows it to say the answer in language. So it's a really, the capabilities are changing month by month, basically.
Thank you. Yeah, in many ways, we are dealing here with a moving target. So it gives us more stuff to discuss going forward. Another question is from one of our corporate partners of the Mack Institute, Tata Communications, represented here by Ankur Jindal. He's asking, how's issue of data privacy and protection being addressed to make it safe for enterprises to adopt GPT in production? Chris, would you, as a...
Yeah, this is an incredibly important issue that affects lots of different industries. So I was chatting with DARPA about like people on military bases wanting to try out ChatGPT, and although they wouldn't type in classified information, they might still disclose operational procedures that would be sensitive. Medical professionals, like clearly you have like patient privacy that you need to ensure. And then just like good corporate practices, you probably don't want to share information with other companies. So I believe that there's going to be an emerging market for company internal hosted versions of these models that is really probably what you ideally want if you're wanting to be super sensitive or super secretive. There are some current solutions that allow you to use the OpenAI system in a way that doesn't save or train on your data. So if you use the API rather than typing things into ChatGPT, it won't by default save any of your information. ChatGPT's interface, the one that you type into directly from the web page, will. So be careful what you type there. Yeah, so this is an emerging market that I think will likely be addressed by companies in the coming months.
Thank you.
And I would add in just really quickly that agree with everything you said. I think there's a lot of rumor that, and also, you know, even now, OpenAI does let you turn off training for your personal use also. And, you know, Microsoft has Azure clusters. Like, I think this is often used as an excuse to get people to not touch this stuff when it's clearly a very temporary problem, right? There's new APIs coming out, there's new incentives to use it. OpenAI just finally released their security page the other day, you know, yesterday. So this is not a long-term kind of problem. And I certainly understand worrying about it, but people send stuff to AWS all the time. You know, Microsoft will handle these things, other people will. It's just not a long-term issue. And a lot of it's by rumor, right? A lot of people have heard of like Samsung. I just literally talked to someone today who's really, you know, knows a lot, but was saying how he'd heard that Samsung got their data back out of ChatGPT. That's not actually what happened. Samsung was nervous that somebody at Samsung put proprietary data into ChatGPT. It's very hard to extract out exactly the information you put in, especially once you've gone through training already. So I think this is often an overblown fear compared to reality, but I totally understand the standards. But I don't think you should be fixating too much that that's not going to be okay soon.
Thank you. Another group of questions has to do with biases. One way our participants put it here is since ChatGPT is thought to be trained on Wikipedia and Reddit, the technology is likely to be very biased towards white, wealthy men from developed countries. How are companies reducing bias? What can be done in that sense, and so on? Who would like to comment?
I mean, I can give you an example that touches on another question that was posed on the English language. My son and I just did an interesting experiment where we took an English text and translated it into German. Now, in German, when you use words for professor or for teacher or for assistant, we have an ending that will reveal whether it is male or female. And so what is interesting is that managers and professors were all male in the translation, and assistants and helpers were all female. Right? And so I think there's this kind of this pattern, and it's like with people, right? You wonder who educated this technology, right? And of course, the world, it's just basically giving us a mirror of all the text that is out there. And that is just a pattern that it has picked up. And as Chris has shown, when it makes a probabilistic forecast of what's the next word after an important wealthy job, the ending is going to be male.
Yes. So what can be done to prevent biases?
So this is a super interesting and important question. So I think if you had told me when I was an undergraduate studying computer science that I would have to be careful to design computer algorithms that weren't racist or misogynistic, I just literally would not have understood what you mean. But it's totally clear now that biases that are in the data get propagated into the models themselves. And these can end up being quite subtle. So one of the I've got a preprint on arXiv that just came out. I'll flash it up here in case anyone's taking a look. This is similar to what Christian was saying about language encoding some biases. So he was talking about gendered nouns being associated with professions, but they're also interesting like geopolitical biases that get encoded in different language models. So if you talk about a territorial dispute, so thinking about the region of Ukraine that got annexed by Russia prior to the training of the GPT model, if you ask in Russian, like who controls that province, it'll tell you that Russia does. If you ask in Ukrainian, it'll tell you that Ukraine does, right? So there's bias encoded in the underlying reporting and things like that. this is an open-ended problem. The current method that people are using is called reinforcement learning with human feedback, where you try to get the model to behave in a way that's better aligned with societal values. So you're less likely to be able to provoke the model into saying something explicitly racist or sexist. If you ask it to do something illegal, it'll try to steer you away from that. That information is still in the model, and it's really just like a layer that we're trying to put on top of it to guide the interactions. So this is going to be an ongoing topic of research, I think, and I think companies can adopt best practices or use the current technology that's available, like reinforcement learning with human feedback, which requires a bit of customized data creation in order to try to encode good societal values.
Thank you. Well, since we probably have time only for one more question, I'd like to kind of bring up something which is the kind of elephant in the room. It's put here this way. What are your thoughts on the balance of excitement and increasing number of use cases for this incredible tech versus concern around threat to humanity? So very quickly, if each of you can make your point. Chris, maybe let's start from the beginning.
So I'm a technology optimist. I think that the potential for this, like making us more productive workers and unlocking the creative potential in many more people, is really there. And I think everyone, all of our students at Penn are really remarkable people who will be able to adapt to whatever future we find ourselves in. So I'm super confident for the class of individuals who come through our university. I think there is like a very important broader societal thing that we need to keep track of. My PDoom, my probability that this is going to be an extinction event, is vanishingly small, but I do think that there is potential for job displacement and things like that, and we need to be prepared as a society.
Thank you. Christian?
We're not going to run out of work. We're not going to run out of work. There will be children to be educated. There will be elderly and sick people that need human help. And there's an environment that needs to be changed. Right? If you think about the big problems facing our society, we need more work and not less work. And here's a technology that will make us productive. Are there risks? Yes, misinformation, abuse, terroristic attacks, and maybe super AGI are risks eventually. Some of them are already here. But I think the idea that we're going to run out of work, I just don't see.
Thank you. Ethan, please.
I am excitedly fatalistic at the same time, right? So I think we haven't seen a general purpose technology ever adopted the speed. Cards are being thrown in the air and we don't know where they're going to land. It's going to affect every industry, culture, different, and we're in for, I think in the grand scale, this is going to be transformatively good. I think in the medium scale, there's going to be a lot of bad mixed in very dramatic ways that involve both misuse of AI, but also job losses. Like we're used to looking back and saying, oh, there's lots of jobs in the end, but we're not used to living through a period of actual accelerated disruption with exponential growth. And I think the closest we came was unfortunately COVID, where things changed very quickly and in lots of different ways. I don't think this is COVID, but I think that we have that same kind of pace of like exponential change that no one can quite handle. And I think it's going to be a bit of a rough ride. I think there's opportunities for great change and positive stuff, but I do think there's going to be disruption along the way, and we're going to have to deal with that. So I think being flexible is going to matter. Pretending these tools don't exist doesn't help you. And pretending that just stopping long-term existential threat is going to protect us from the disruption that's going to happen, I also think is a mistake. Like we're going to live through it. We'll get through the other side, and I think we'll be better, but it's not going to always be easy.
Thank you very much. So we need to stop here. We have quite a few more questions. We'll keep them and use them to shape our agenda for follow-up webinars on the topic. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on at Wharton around this, as you saw already from some examples. So thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists first, and of course the audience that stuck with us here for an hour. You have enjoyable and productive summer, and goodbye until the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.